This video will be a character overview and analysis of 12th Prince Momoze Huiguro. Initially, I'll provide an outline of the prince by going into her princely privilege and personality. I'll follow this up with an analysis of her guardian spirit beast, GSB for short. Afterwards, I'll go into the circumstances that led to her tragic demise, and finally, I'll finish up by giving my opinion on how good of a king she would have made had she somehow won the succession war. Let's get into it. 12th Prince Momoze was the eldest child of 7th Queen Sevanti, having been the older sister to her little brother, 13th Prince Mariam. As the 12th child of the king and the first child of the 7th Queen, Momoze had next to no princely privilege when compared to her elder siblings. Actually, considering how much the 7th Queen favored Momoze's younger brother Mariam, enough to relegate most of Momoze's own guards and servants to him, it's fair to say that despite being older, she was second to last when it came to overall princely privilege, only outranking 14th Prince Wobble. Moving on to her character. Momoze is an incredibly demure and meek young girl, who seems to have spent most of her time quietly knitting. She lacked the authoritativeness and self-importance characteristic to a majority of her siblings. Her meekness was not merely a product of her natural disposition, but was almost certainly in major part a consequence of how Queen Sevanti treated her. The 7th Queen made it clear that the younger Mariam was her favorite when she openly ordered for Momoze's guards and servants to be relegated to him. When some of the staff voiced their concern for the 12th Prince's safety, the Queen dismissed them, outright proclaiming without an ounce of tactfulness or thoughtfulness that Mariam was the one who really mattered. To appease the staff members voicing their concerns, she openly asked Momoze if she agreed with the transfer. Momoze gladly agreed, of course, raising no concerns for her own safety. Instead, she pitied both her mother and her little brother, thinking how those who aren't fit to be king are so overcome with fear. For reasons that will become clear when I talk about her GSB, I believe this to be a coping mechanism channeled and manifested through the prism of royal inculcation almost all princes older than Wobble exhibit. See, the primary function of a queen is not to be a loving and benevolent parental figure in the lives of their children, God no, but to bring up a new generation of potential rulers. In order to be worthy of their royal status, each prince must strive in earnest and hold in his or her highest regards a single goal: kingship. Everything else is secondary. However, the problem with Momoze, and a few other of her siblings, is that despite holding this belief in and desire for kingship, she was never at all proactive about it. Hell, she wasn't even reactive. When her mother took away her bodyguards, Momoze didn't even object, despite having the full authority to keep them to herself, as they were contracted under her name. No, she just accepted it and convinced herself that she's essentially invincible, and that this move was simply a product of her mother's and brother's fear. For a little girl who grew up as royalty and for whom material and physical hardship must have been a faraway concept, it's not difficult to imagine how this illusion of invincibility could have malformed. See, Momoze, above all, felt unnecessary, unwanted, and unloved by first and foremost her own mother. She was all alone, and that scared her. So, in order to cope with this fear, her young mind deluded itself in associating the very feeling of fear and anxiety with a lack of kingship potential. She therefore clung to this idea of becoming king, as it was the one benefaction her mother had left her, the one belief the queen needed to personally nurture and instill into her young daughter. Perhaps even after her little brother was born, at least for a while. Momoze unconsciously chose to misinterpret her mother's queenly duty for genuine maternal love. As such, she learned not to blame either Sevanti or little Mariam, as her doting of him was nothing more than a consequence of his inadequacy. Someone as openly fearful and anxious as Mariam could never become king, and the fact that Queen Savanti showed no concern for her meant that she believed in Momoze's kingly potential. It wasn't fair, but that's how things were with royalty. Everything would come into place when she eventually did take the throne. In truth, the little girl was just afraid of showing vulnerability, as she was terrified that her mother wouldn't care. On that depressing note, let's move on to discussing 12th Prince Momoze's guardian spirit beast. Momoze's GSB takes the form of a large, rather cartoonish, mouse-like creature. It reminds me of a plush toy a little princess would hug for comfort as she was falling asleep. Its ability is equally depressing, if not more so. The GSB is a pseudo-coercive manipulator with the ability to effectively pester a NEN user into controlling them. See, what it does is to badger its target by repeatedly asking whether they're free. Then, if the target replies with a no, that fulfills the condition of conjuring a miniature version of the GSB, visible and audible only to the target. The reason it's labeled as pseudo-coercive is because the target has to fulfill the initial condition of their own volition, i.e. by answering the GSB's question. While this may or may not have been an intentional tactic, the GSB used the chaos created by the GSBs invading room 1014 in order to catch Sayard off guard and trick him into fulfilling the condition of replying to its inquiry. The little version of the GSB is parasitic as well and doesn't go away even if the main body of the GSB retreats, since it feeds off the target's aura instead of consuming that of her princely host. Its pestering continues until such a time as the parasite no longer has aura to feed on, gets exorcised, potentially destroyed, though these types of non-constructs often have an invulnerability condition, or the victim answers in the affirmative. Should they confirm that they are indeed free, the parasite takes control of the target. While the level of control is profound enough where the victim can be made to attack and even kill people they never would under normal circumstances, it's uncertain how precise and deft it really is. As in, could the target be forced to control their NEN? And if so, to what degree? Could they be made to perform advanced NEN techniques such as Ryu or Shu, or even use their Hatsu? From what we've seen, while indeed cognizant to a degree, it would seem that the GSB's childish appearance is at least somewhat indicative of its mental faculties. Instead of exhibiting more subtle control and perhaps attempting to take by surprise the guards and assassinate Prince Wobble, or at least Queen Oito, it goes on to kill some of the bodyguards instead. While one of them was a hunter and thus a high-value target, it came at the cost of any other future attempts at covert manipulation, as the other guards would have been fully alerted to the threat it posed. This is especially true since a single escapade like this is enough for the GSB to entirely dematerialize as a consequence of using up Momoze's limited NEN reserves. Another huge problem with the ability is that entering Zetsu is enough to counter it. While doing so for the first time would be a huge risk for the one doing it, since depending on the properties and conditions of the parasite, the host could very easily end up dead. As soon as this weakness would be revealed, the GSB would effectively become powerless. Furthermore, since GSBs are only visible to non-NEN users, it couldn't ever pester someone not awakened to NEN, and thus incapable of using Zetsu, into falling for its trap. While it could have had additional powers or abilities, we never got the chance to see them, and based on what we had the chance to see, 12th Prince Momoze's guardian spirit beast is the prime candidate for the weakest GSB revealed thus far. While not all GSBs are combat focused, they fulfill their purposes either really or even extremely well, while Momoze simply has too many limitations and weaknesses based on what we've seen. Now, the reason I said its ability was so exceptionally depressing is, well, because GSBs are reflections of their host's personality and character. They are shaped by their inclinations, desires, and needs. And Momoze's GSB indicates that she really needed someone, anyone, if not her own mother and father, to pay attention to her. While she was putting on a strong front, even to herself, she was being overwhelmed by loneliness to such a degree that it was the primary shaper of her GSB's ability. On that even more depressing note, let's move on to How she died. Alright, let's get full on morbid on this one. Momoze died alone in her chambers, choked to death by a man she thought was there to protect her. It having overused Momoze's nen reserves meant that her GSB could not materialize to protect her from her assailant. In the end, she was left bereft of even her own guardian spirit. This image of her with her arms spread out was always haunting to me, because it implies 8th Queen Oito either saw Momoze's very last moments, as she had already lost consciousness at that point, or that owing to her mother's blatant favoritism and negligence, paired with a heavy fatigue caused by her GSB's unconscious activation, Momoze had fully resigned herself to her fate. Just so you know, I'm getting a beer after this recording. If it's any consolation, Hanzo executed the perpetrator, Tufty, in the same way he killed Momoze. Tufty was, by the way, likely directly instructed to commit the assassination by 5th Queen Swinko Swinko. Not only because of the fact that he was under her direct employee, but because of what she said to her overgrown man-child of a son, 8th Prince Sale Sale in chapter 366. Namely, that she'll do what she can on her end. Finally, it's worth noting that despite her favoritism and prioritization of Mariam, Queen Sevanti was saddened to learn of her daughter's passing. This implies that her favoritism wasn't absolute. She indeed cared for her daughter, just not as much as for her son. While there are a few potential reasons for her favoritism, I'll save that for the upcoming video. Despite her being out of the race, I'd still like to briefly discuss what her realistic chances of victory even were, along with what kind of king she would have made had she somehow won. As I'm sure this video made it clear, Momoze's chances of victory were slim to none. She had no allies, no influence, and her GSB wasn't nearly powerful enough to compensate for any of that. Just the opposite, actually. Its action during the very first day of the voyage indirectly led to her death. As things stand, I'd argue she's the prince who was the least likely to come out the winner by a substantial margin. As such, it's not at all surprising that she was the first to drop out. Now, had she somehow beaten all the odds to become king without undergoing any substantial character development in the meantime, we're going by click rules, what kind of ruler would she have been? Not a good one. Actually, probably one of the less good ones, let's say. While there's not much to go on, since she's among the princes that has appeared the least, she'd either be a puppet for her mother or some other deep state dignitary. She'd be a puppet ruler who'd sign what she was told to sign and decree what she was told to decree. There would definitely have been turmoil in Kakin, as those in the position to control the young king or queen, still not sure how that works in Kakin, battled for power and influence behind the scenes to be the worm tongue to her Theoden. This would weaken Kakin from the inside, and would either halt or at least greatly slow down its rapid rate of development. I also see a route where Queen Sevanti goes ballistic if Mariam ends up dead, and Momoze realizes that it was never about kingship potential, but either just pure favoritism or something else, which, as I said, I'll discuss very soon, and full-on executes, or at least banishes her mother, and enters the Dark King Momoze arc. And that's 12th Prince Momoze covered. As you may have noticed, jumping from the 4th to the 12th Prince after covering the first 4 sequentially is a bit of a breakaway from how I've been handling this series thus far. That's because I've decided to, for now, cover the princes who have dropped out of the Succession War, since I'm hoping Togashi will release the next batch of chapters relatively soon, and I don't want for the info and analyses I provide to be out of date within a couple of months. As such, you can expect a video on 8th Prince Sale Sale relatively soon. As always, thank you very much for watching, your feedback is always appreciated, subscribe if you'd like more content like this. I'd like to thank Amaswamy and Matt B for going the extra mile in supporting the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.